Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're exploring something truly remarkable. It's your adaptive immune defenses.
And we're going way beyond the basics today. It's going to be pretty fascinating. We're going to uncover how your body's like an incredibly well-trained military force.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it can distinguish friend from foe
That's incredible.
on a molecular level
Wow, that's so cool.
to combat infections more effectively every time.
So when we talk about this adaptive immunity, what makes it so special? What sets it apart?
Well, unlike your innate immune system, which is like a general protection, your adaptive immunity, well, it learns.
Huh.
And it remembers
Oh, why?
from past encounters. So it actually improves with every encounter. It levels up its defenses.
So the more you're exposed to, let's say, a common cold virus,
Right.
the stronger your defenses against it become.
Right.
So does that mean getting sick is actually a good thing?
Well, not exactly. I mean, we certainly don't want to go around getting sick unnecessarily, but the principle is interesting. Each encounter with a pathogen creates what we call immunological memory.
Immunological memory.
So the next time that same virus shows up, your body is ready. It's primed for a much faster and more effective counterattack, sometimes even before you feel any symptoms.
So that's why you don't often get the same cold twice.
Right.
Or if you do, it's much milder.
Precisely. And this ability to learn and remember, it's really remarkable. It's what makes vaccines so effective.
Oh, interesting.
But we'll delve into that a bit later. For now, let's unpack the two main branches of this really incredible system. We have humoral immunity and we have cellular immunity.
Okay, so it's like having two branches of a specialized military
Right.
working together to keep us safe.
Exactly.
What makes them distinct? What sets them apart?
So humoral immunity is all about precision targeting. It uses B cells to produce antibodies. These antibodies, they're like guided missiles. They lock onto very specific invaders and they mark them for destruction.
So they're like the snipers of the immune system?
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
They're very precise.
And then what about cellular immunity?
All right, so cellular immunity, this is more like hand-to-hand combat.
Oh, okay.
It relies on T cells. And these T cells, they directly engage with infected cells and eliminate them. Think of them as special forces, trained to take out threats with surgical precision.
Wow, that's incredible. So we've got these two different branches, both working together,
Absolutely.
but very specialized
Yeah.
in what they do.
Yeah, and to understand their workings, we really need to meet the key players. So let's start with antigens. Think of them as like red flags.
Okay.
They trigger an adaptive immune response. And these red flags, they can be anything. It could be proteins on the surface of bacteria or even those pesky molecules on pollen.
Oh, the ones that cause allergies.
Exactly.
So even things that aren't necessarily harmful can trigger our adaptive immune system.
Absolutely. And that's when things can go awry a little bit and lead to allergies. But in general, antigens are crucial because they alert our immune system to something foreign, something that doesn't belong.
That's pretty cool. So what happens when, say, a B cell encounters an antigen that it recognizes?
Well, that's when things get really interesting. The B cell will produce antibodies. And antibodies, they're these Y-shaped proteins, and they're designed to bind to that specific antigen, like a lock and key.
Like a log and key. That's a good analogy.
Mm.
And so we have millions of these unique antibodies just floating around, ready to target different invaders.
More than millions, actually. We have the capacity to produce billions of different antibodies.
Wow.
And each one has a unique structure and a specific function. Think of them as specialized units within our immune army.
So like different types of soldiers, each one trained for a specific mission.
Exactly. You've probably heard of IgE, for example.
Yeah, that's the one that's responsible for allergic reactions, right?
Exactly. IgE triggers the release of histamine, which causes all those allergy symptoms. But there are other types of antibodies, too, each with their own specific role to play.
Oh, interesting. So tell me about some of the other types.
So you have IgG, which is the most abundant. It provides long-term immunity. And then you have IgM. This is like the first responder. It appears very early on during infections. And then there's IgA. This is crucial for mucosal immunity, so it protects the lining of your respiratory and digestive tracts. It acts like a first line of defense against invaders.
Wow. So it's not just like one type of antibody that fights all the battles. It's like a coordinated effort with each antibody specializing in a different type of defense.
That's the beauty of the adaptive immune system. It's so intricate and highly specialized.
It's amazing. But here's a question. With all these antibodies floating around, how does the immune system know which cells are the invaders and which cells actually belong to our body? Like, wouldn't it be disastrous if our immune system started attacking our own cells?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. That would be a major problem. That's where MHC molecules come in. MHC stands for Major Histocompatibility Complex. And these molecules, they act like display cases on the surface of our cells.
Oh.
And they present antigens to T cells, allowing them to distinguish self from non-self.
So it's like a cellular ID card.
Exactly. It shows the immune system who belongs and who doesn't, and it's incredibly precise. In fact, it's so precise that it can even detect tiny differences between your own cells and the cells of, say, an identical twin. This is why organ transplantation can be so tricky. The recipient's immune system can recognize the donor cells as foreign and attack them, leading to rejection.
That makes a lot of sense. So tell me more about these MHC molecules. Are there different types?
There are two main types, MHCI and MHC2. MHCI molecules are found on pretty much every cell in your body, and they present antigens derived from proteins that are produced inside the cell. So, for example, if a cell is infected with a virus, viral proteins will be produced inside the cell. And those viral proteins get chopped up and displayed on MHCI molecules.
So it's like each cell is constantly showing what's going on inside, like letting the immune system know if everything's okay or if there's a problem.
That's a great way to put it. And then you have MHC2, which is only found on specialized antigen-presenting cells. These cells are like the intelligence agents of the immune system.
Oh, tell me more about these intelligence agents.
Well, you have macrophages, dendritic cells, and even B cells. They patrol the body, they engulf pathogens, break them down, and then present fragments of those pathogens, the antigens, on their MHCI molecules for T cells to inspect. It's like taking a mugshot of the invader and presenting it to the immune system's special forces.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So these antigen-presenting cells are like the detectives, gathering evidence and then presenting it to the T cells. And the T cells are the ones who decide how to respond.
Exactly. And there are three main classes of T cells. We have helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, and regulatory T cells.
Wow. So it sounds like there's a real team effort going on here.
Oh, absolutely.
So can we delve deeper into these different types of T cells?
Absolutely. Each type of T cell has its own fascinating story, and their interactions are key to understanding how our immune system mounts such a sophisticated and targeted defense. Okay, so let's jump into the world of T cells. First up, we've got the helper T cells, real masterminds behind the whole immune response.
Oh, wow, masterminds. They sound pretty important.
They are. They orchestrate everything. But they don't just act as general helpers, you know.
So there's more to them than just helping.
Yeah, when a helper T cell encounters an antigen, presented on an MHC TI molecule,
right,
it gets activated. But then it takes on a more specialized role. It's kind of like, choosing a career path.
Oh, interesting. So like a soldier deciding to specialize in intelligence gathering or becoming a medic, something like that.
That's a perfect analogy. So some become Th1 cells, others become Th2 cells, and then you've got Th17 cells, just to name a few.
Wow, so many options.
And each subtype plays a crucial role in directing the immune response against very specific threats.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach?
Not at all. They have their areas of expertise.
That's fascinating. Can you give me an example? Like, what kind of threat would trigger a Th1 response?
Okay, sure. Let's say you're dealing with a bacterial infection.
Okay.
Macrophages, they're on the scene. They gobble up those bacteria.
Right.
And they present the bacterial antigens on MHC2. Along comes a helper T cell, recognizes that antigen and gets activated. But now, depending on the environment and the specific cytokines present, that helper T cell might differentiate into a Th1 cell.
So the environment actually influences their specialization.
It does. It really does. And these Th1 cells, they're experts at battling those intracellular bacteria, the ones that get inside our cells, and viruses too. They release these powerful cytokines like interferon gamma.
Interferon gamma, what does that do?
It acts like a signal flare, It boosts the bacteria-killing abilities of macrophages and rallies those cytotoxic T cells to the fight.
It's like calling in the reinforcements.
Exactly. And giving them a pep talk at the same time. So those Th1 cells, they're crucial for controlling those infections that have managed to get inside our cells.
That makes sense. What about Th2 cells? What are they in charge of?
Well, Th2 cells, they're the specialists in dealing with parasites. And unfortunately for some of us, they're also the ones that orchestrate those pesky allergic responses.
Ah, so that's how those overtop reactions to pollen or peanuts happen.
Exactly. Th2 cells release cytokines like IL-4, IL-5, and IL-13. And these cytokines, they stimulate B cells to produce antibodies, particularly IgE.
Ah, IgE, the allergy antibody.
That's the one. Those Th2 cytokines, they also activate eosinophils and mast cells. And while these cells are great at fighting parasites, they can also contribute to those allergy symptoms when they overreact to things that are harmless.
Right, right. So it's like they have the right weapons, but sometimes they aim at the wrong target.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And it highlights the importance of balance in the immune system, Everything needs to be working in harmony.
Balance is key. So we've got Th1 and Th2 cells. What about these Th17 cells? You mentioned those earlier.
Right, right. The Th17 cells, they're named after their signature cytokine, IL-17.
IL-17. Okay, and what's their specialty?
Well, they're crucial for defending against those extracellular bacteria and fungi. Think of them as the frontline troops. They're really good at quickly recruiting neutrophils to the site of infection.
Neutrophils.
Yeah.
Remind me what those are again.
They're like the first responders of the immune system. They're the first ones on the scene when there's an infection.
So the Th17 cells are the ones sounding the alarm and calling in the backup when there's a breach in our defenses.
Exactly. And they're also involved in inflammation.
Inflammation. Isn't that a bad thing?
Well, inflammation is a necessary part of the immune response, but it can sometimes get a little out of control, and contribute to things like autoimmune diseases.
Oh, I see. So it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to those cytotoxic T cells, the assassins we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah, the assassins. Those sound pretty intense. How do they actually kill infected cells?
They're incredibly efficient killing machines. They're constantly patrolling the body, scanning cells for any signs of trouble. Remember those MHC-I molecules, those display cases on almost all of our cells?
Right, the ones that show what's happening inside the cell.
Exactly. So when a cell gets infected with a virus, for example, viral proteins get produced inside that cell, right?
Right.
And those viral proteins, they get chopped up and displayed on those MHC-I molecules.
So it's like the infected cell is waving a flag saying, "Help, I've been hijacked."
Perfect analogy. And along comes a cytotoxic T cell. It's got a T cell receptor that perfectly matches that specific viral antigen. It docks onto that infected cell like a lock and key and releases this lethal cocktail of molecules, including perforin and granzymes.
Perforin and granzymes, those sound pretty ominous. What do they do?
Well, perforin acts like a drill,
Oh, wow.
It punches holes in the membrane of that infected cell.
Okay.
And then the granzymes, those deadly enzymes, they enter through those holes and trigger apoptosis.
Apoptosis, isn't that programmed cell death?
It is. It is. It's basically a controlled demolition, taking out that infected cell without causing too much damage to surrounding cells.
So it's a very precise operation.
It is very precise. And this targeted elimination, it's crucial for controlling viral infections and preventing them from spreading.
That's amazing. It's like our bodies have these tiny assassins working to keep us safe.
It is remarkable. And then we have the regulatory T cells. They're also called TREGs. They're like the peacekeepers of the immune system.
The peacekeepers. So they're the ones that make sure things don't get out of hand.
Exactly. They're essential for preventing the immune system from overreacting and attacking our own tissues.
Which would be bad.
Very bad. That's called autoimmunity. And it can lead to a whole host of problems.
Right. So these TREGs, they're like the diplomats. They make sure the immune response stays balanced and doesn't turn on us.
Exactly. They suppress the activity of other immune cells, like those helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. And they do this by releasing these inhibitory cytokines and by directly interacting with those cells.
So it's like they're saying, okay, everyone stand down. The threat is under control. No need to go overboard.
Perfect. That's a great way to visualize it. TREGs are essential for maintaining that immune homeostasis and preventing autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and multiple sclerosis.
It's incredible how all these different types of T cells work together, some activating, some eliminating, some regulating. It's all so perfectly coordinated.
It truly is a remarkable system, and we've only just begun to explore this fascinating world. There's still so much more to learn about how B cells get activated and how they produce those targeted antibodies.
Well, let's dive into that then. Tell me more about how those antibody factories get switched on and start producing those amazing weapons.
All right, so we've covered those amazing T cells and all their different
We
roles.
have.
But now let's talk about those B cells, the antibody factories.
Right.
How do they actually get turned on and start producing all those targeted weapons?
Well, B cell activation, it's kind of like a carefully choreographed dance.
Oh, a dance.
It involves multiple steps
Okay.
and a lot of interaction with other immune cells, particularly those helper T cells that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
So it's not quite as simple as just encountering an antigen.
There's a little more to it.
There's a little more to it, yeah. So it all starts with a B cell, bumping into an antigen that matches its B cell receptor, its BCR. And each B cell, remember, it has these unique BCRs that can recognize a specific antigen. Right, so each B cell has a specific target that it's looking for.
Exactly. But while this binding of an antigen to the BCR, it's the first step, it's usually not enough to fully activate the B cell. It's kind of like receiving a package, but you need a confirmation code to open it,
Okay, so what's the confirmation code in this case?
Well, that code often comes from helper T cells. Remember we were talking about how helper T cells recognize antigens presented on MHCTI molecules?
Yeah, those display cases on the antigen-presenting cells.
Right. Well, B cells, they're also antigen-presenting cells. They can engulf pathogens, break them down, and present those antigens on their MHCTI molecules, just like macrophages and dendritic cells can.
Wait, so B cells can actually present antigens to T cells. I thought they were just antibody producers.
They are, but they're multi-talented. So when a helper T cell recognizes an antigen presented by a B cell, it gets activated and releases cytokines that provide that crucial second signal for B cell activation.
So the helper T cells are like the quality control managers, giving the B cells the green light to start production.
That's a great analogy, yeah. Once the B cell receives both of those signals, it becomes fully activated and undergoes this incredible transformation.
Okay, I want to see this antibody factory in action. What happens next?
All right, so the activated B cell starts dividing rapidly. It creates clones of itself. And each clone has the same BCR, so they all recognize that same antigen.
Okay.
Now, some of those clones, they differentiate into plasma cells, which are the true antibody-producing powerhouses.
They're like the assembly line churning out the weapons.
Exactly. Plasma cells, they can pump out thousands of antibodies per second.
Wow.
Flooding the bloodstream and tissues with these highly specific weapons.
That's amazing. And so these antibodies, they're designed to bind to the specific antigen that triggered the whole response, right?
That's right.
So what happens when they bind?
Well, the binding of those antibodies to the antigens can have several effects, all aimed at neutralizing the threat. One way they work is through neutralization.
Neutralization, tell me more about that.
So imagine a virus trying to dock onto a cell and infect it, right?
Okay.
Antibodies can actually bind to that virus and physically block that process.
Oh, wow.
It's like putting up a shield around the cells and preventing the virus from getting in.
So they're literally preventing the infection from even happening.
They are. And they can also neutralize toxins that are produced by bacteria. So it's like a toxin cleanup on a microscopic level.
That's pretty impressive. They're like tiny shields and toxin sponges all rolled into one. So do they have any other tricks up their sleeve?
They do. They're also masters of what we call opsonization.
Opsonization? That sounds interesting.
So think of opsonization as putting a big eat me sign on a pathogen.
Oh, okay.
Antibodies, they coat the pathogen and make it much more appealing to those phagocytic cells.
So like macrophages and neutrophils?
Exactly. So it's like making the enemy more visible and much easier to grab for those immune cells.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like marking the target for destruction.
That's a great way to put it. Antibodies can also activate the complement system. And that's this cascade of proteins that can directly destroy pathogens or even enhance other immune responses like inflammation and phagocytosis.
Wow. So antibodies are really versatile. They're like shields, they're guides for destruction, and they can even amplify other immune responses. That's pretty amazing.
They are. They're really remarkable molecules. And they're constantly being produced and refined throughout an immune response, thanks to this process we call class switching.
Wait, class switching, is that what we were talking about before with the different classes of antibodies?
It is. So during an immune response, B cells can actually switch the class of antibody they're producing depending on the pathogen they're fighting and the stage of the infection. It's like upgrading their weapons based on the battlefield conditions.
So they're not stuck with just one type of weapon. They can adapt their tactics as needed.
Exactly. Early on in the infection, they primarily produce IgM, which is a large antibody, great at activating complement, kind of like sending out that first wave of attack.
And then as the battle progresses, they switch to more specialized weapons.
Exactly. So they might switch to producing IgG, which is a smaller, more versatile antibody capable of neutralizing pathogens, opsonizing them, and also activating complement. Or they might start producing IgA, which is really important for defending those mucosal surface, like the lining of your gut.
It's incredible how adaptable they are. So how does this all tie into long-term immunity? You mentioned memory B cells before.
Right, memory B cells, they are the key to long-term immunity. So during an immune response, some of those activated B cells, they differentiate into memory cells instead of becoming those antibody factories. They're like the veterans, ready to be called back into action if that same pathogen ever shows up again.
So they're just kind of hanging out, waiting for a familiar enemy to reappear.
Exactly. They reside in the lymphoid tissues like the lymph nodes and the spleen, just waiting for that second encounter. And if it happens, they can very quickly differentiate into plasma cells and start pumping out antibodies often before you even realize you've been exposed.
So that's why if you get chickenpox once, you're usually immune for life.
Exactly. Your immune system remembers that virus and can shut it down before it causes any problems. And this is exactly how vaccines work.
Right, vaccines. They introduce a weakened or inactive version of a pathogen, or sometimes just its antigens,
Right.
to trigger that immune response, but without causing the actual disease.
Exactly. It gives your immune system a chance to create those memory B and T cells so that if you ever encounter the real pathogen, your body is ready to fight it off.
It's amazing. We're essentially using the power of our own immune system to protect us from disease.
We are. It's a pretty elegant system.
It really is. Well, I feel like we've been on this incredible journey today. We've explored this intricate world of adaptive immunity, from how our bodies know self from non-self, to how different immune cells specialize and work together, and how the system remembers past encounters to protect us from future threats.
We have. We've just scratched the surface, really. But I hope our listeners have gained a new appreciation for this amazing system that's constantly working to keep them healthy.
It really is remarkable. It's a real testament to how complex and how ingenious the human body is. So
Right.
next time you feel a cold coming on or you get a cut that heals quickly, take a moment to appreciate your adaptive immune system. It's a powerful force working tirelessly to keep you safe.
Absolutely. And remember, the world of immunology is just full of fascinating discoveries waiting to be made. So if this deep dive sparked your curiosity, I really encourage you to explore further and delve deeper into any of the areas that piqued your interest.
That's right. The more we learn about the immune system, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and future generations from disease. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay well.